So let's get started. The first thing we do at the beginning of every OpenChain meeting is to show our antitrust policy notice. If you have any questions, you can find the full policy on our website, and you can also contact our counsel specialized in this area, Andy Updegrove. I wanted to flag that we will be changing our meeting schedule from February onwards. The new schedule is based on feedback we had from people in both Asia and Europe regarding our timing. Traditionally, our timing allowed for one meeting that was suitable for the US and Europe and one meeting that was suitable for the US and Asia. But we have received feedback that people want to be able to join every meeting. So starting next month, our adjusted schedule will look like this. Basically, it will allow people to dial in from US, Europe, or Asia. One of the meetings will be late on the US side, and one of the meetings will be late on the Asian side, but it's possible for someone to attend everything. I will be sending out invites to everyone so that they can keep track of this and can easily participate. Naturally, if you have feedback about this new schedule, that feedback is always welcome. Now let's move on to the business of the day. So this webinar is going over something that we've touched on a few times, but it's a summary and it's designed to help people, especially new people arriving in our community, understand what they can do with regards both editing and extending ISO 5230. So the first thing we'll cover is contribution to the specification and the process we have for that. And the second thing will be optional extensions to the specification. Now, before we get started, I want to make very clear what we're doing with the specification today and tomorrow. So ISO IEC 5230 was released in December, and that is exactly the same as OpenChain 2.1. the version we host on our website. ISO 5230 will not be changing anytime soon. This standard will be in the market for quite a few years before we expect to update it. However, from the very start, we want to give people a way to contribute ideas, suggestions, and concerns about how the specification could look in the future. So even though we don't plan to update the specification, we want to capture comments and suggestions from now. In a very similar manner, we are going to be talking about optional extensions to the specification. They won't replace or change ISO 5230. But they will provide ways that people could optionally expand on it to cover topics like security and export control. The long story short is that ISO 5230 is the ISO standard for open source compliance. It's released, it's out there, and it's not changing anytime soon. But this is an open standard and an open community, so we will be accepting ideas and suggestions, and we will be looking at how to help people use ISO 5230 in contexts outside of open source license compliance. So we will be working to help people do their best. Now, let's get started. Contribution. So on our website, when it comes to contributing to the standard, you will find plenty of information. There's a page focused on contribution that has the latest version of the standard, reference translations, and all the past versions of the standard. We also have a detailed explanation of the specification development process. Now that process is all about how do we update the standard. And you can see there's 9 steps in the process, and it's a relatively formal process. So when we actually want to update ISO 5230, we have a clear, structured process that we've used many times before. However, like I said, we're not actually planning to update 5230 anytime soon. So that while that development process is there, the most important thing that you can take away is that we're accepting suggestions. And you can see here that we have a point, suggestions are tracked in the issue tracking list. Basically, the OpenChain specification has a mailing list and a presence on GitHub. The mailing list is what we call the single source of truth. So what appears on the mailing list as a discussion or description of something submitted to GitHub, all of that is our official process for tracking the ideas and comments and just discussion around the specification. If something happens on the specification list, it's formally understood to be a contribution or a suggestion or an idea around the specification. If something happens elsewhere, it's not understood to be a contribution to the specification. Now, when it comes to any suggestion, so beyond a comment, beyond just asking a question, when it comes to any suggestion, either raised on the mailing list or directly placed on GitHub, we put all of the suggestions into our GitHub repository. And you can see right now there's 13 suggestions open. Some of these are actually going into maybe a future version of the standard. A lot of them will probably be solved just by clarification. So I'll give you a good example here. When it comes to how we describe something like, for instance, objectives or what is effectively resourced, there's 2 options. One option, actually edit the specification, and the second option, just provide clarification material to describe what we meant. And both of those options are perfectly valid. At the moment, our main focus will not be actually editing the spec, but providing clarification material. Remember, ISO 5230 was released by ISO in December, but it has actually been in market since April 2019 as OpenChain 2.0, and then re-edited for the ISO submission OpenChain 2.1. But there's no difference in any of the requirements from OpenChain 2.0 until ISO 5230. The only thing that changed was the structure of the formatting, because ISO needed slightly different formatting. No changes to requirements, no changes to the rules it applies. So what we're dealing with is a standard that has been in market for almost 2 years. And we have not yet found situations where we need to actually change the standard with any particular rush. So a lot of the stuff that comes in and is added as an issue, we address with a simple clarification, but not always. For instance, the very last issue here, scope for next iteration. This is a broad question raised by Andrew Katz, you can see it right there, and replied to initially by Mark Giese, the chair of the specification. And they are talking about how OpenChain can have a slightly different description of scope in the next version. They're not talking about making the next version soon, but they're talking about how the scope could change. And naturally, that's a very valid discussion to have. And we expect people to contribute to it over time. And here's another one, adding a definition of bill of materials in the next standard. We don't have to do that. We're not in a rush to do that, but when we do update the standard, having a definition of that might be useful, and so on and so forth. So, to recap, excuse me. The OpenChain specification, ISO 5230, has a development process for updating. This process is clearly described on our webpage, and it includes things like 14 days of public comments, 14 days of a final freeze cycle, and so on. But we're not updating the standard anytime soon, so the focus is on capturing comments and suggestions from everyone in the world and making a clear list of them. Most comments come in on our mailing list, and the mailing list is the right place to raise comments and suggestions. We put all of those comments and suggestions on GitHub, and we follow them there. Now, you don't have to put something on the mailing list. You can also put it directly on GitHub. However, like I said, the mailing list is the single source of truth. So if someone puts something directly on GitHub, and that's fine, that's totally fine, then we will put that, we will email that to the mailing list as well, because everything that might update or change the specification is listed on the mailing list. And that's the process, that's what we're doing. OpenChain 2.1, that's ISO 5230, is not going to change for a couple of years at least. The official process is there, but right now we're focused not on actually updating the standard, but on capturing all of your perspectives and opinions. You can raise them on the mailing list, or you can add them directly to our GitHub, and they'll be echoed on the mailing list. And anyone is welcome to make any suggestion at all. If the suggestion is not suitable, we will explain why and close the issue. If the suggestion is something that we can answer with reference material, then we will do that instead of updating the standard. And if the suggestion is about an update to the standard, we will add it to the list. And eventually, when we decide to update the standard, we will use our process to go through the list and actually re-edit and release the new standard. Final thing on this topic. We do not have a date for updating the standard. However, I do not expect the standard to be updated before 2024 at the earliest. So don't think that the standard will change anytime soon. The correct standard to adopt is ISO 5230, available today. Okay, we are going to go on to the next topic, which is maybe the most exciting part of our meeting today. So the next topic is optional extensions to the specification. This topic is very important. As OpenChain has grown, we've had a lot of feedback. People are using OpenChain for open source license compliance, but they're also using it in areas like security. They're also using it in areas like export control, and they're also using it in areas like mergers and acquisitions. So, how do we help them use it in those ways? Because right now, if people take ISO 5230 and they decide to use it not only in compliance, but also in security, the question is, How do they make it match up with existing security standards? How do they describe how it helps? And right now, people are doing that on a case-by-case basis. Each company is doing their own thing. That's fine, but the project will help with the big picture. So we are going to discuss and provide guides to using OpenChain in different areas. How does OpenChain work in security? How does it work in export control? And how does it work in mergers and acquisitions? Our goal is not to change the standard. The standard is and always will be the standard for open source license compliance. But our goal will be to provide material, whether it's pure explanation or expansion material that adds extra notes or terms. Optional extensions to the specification will be released to help support the market in doing what it's already doing. I will give you two examples. OpenChain, when it's implemented, OpenChain is a process management standard. So when someone implements OpenChain, they have processes for inbound software, they have processes for internal software, and processes for software being released externally. And because we're focused on compliance, these processes are focused on things like identifying the software and tracking it through your company, making sure that people are trained in this area and understand the importance of, for example, categorizing the software and tracking it. Now, this works perfectly in compliance. It also works perfectly in security, because if you've implemented OpenChain, you'll know what software and what version entered your company. You'll know what's happening to it as it goes through your company, and you'll also have a sanity check as you're about to release it. So, OpenChain is also very useful for any security process management. Now, people are using it that way right now, but we don't have a formal description of how you can use it. We don't have case studies or examples. So that's something we'll work on. And that's what we mean about optional extensions to the specification. I'm just going to pause for a second and see if anyone has questions right now. Okay. If there's no questions, I will continue to say that honestly, we don't have a final form for extensions to the specification. And the reason is that the use cases are all different. For example, in security, our process management helps a lot, but many companies are also using security standards. So the appropriate thing in security might be, not guaranteed to be, but might be, to simply describe how OpenChain helps security and how it interoperates with existing security standards. Meanwhile, in another area, like export control, we might want to provide checklists to catch additional actions necessary for export control. For example, in the US, certain types of cryptography need export license permission. And therefore, using OpenChain can help you identify it, but it doesn't describe then the process for getting the export control license. So in that context, we might want to have an optional document explaining what processes you need to get that export control license. So in other words, the extensions to OpenChain are likely to look different depending on the context and market. And we don't plan to just make stuff up. We will always be looking at extensions specifically based on market demand. We already have people using OpenChain for security, for export control, and for mergers and acquisitions. This will be the most exciting and detailed part of the OpenChain specification contribution in 2021. Starting next month, we're going to make a list of the extension areas, and we're going to begin talking about what's appropriate in each extension area. I will give one final example about merger and acquisitions. We see people using OpenChain in merger and acquisitions for two main purposes. One purpose is to begin to have a sanity check on the intellectual property in the company. If they use OpenChain, they will definitely have records of all of the open source in the company. If they don't use OpenChain, they may have a special internal process to do the same. But OpenChain provides the level of quality necessary, so you can judge what the company is doing. Second part, when it comes to negotiating with the company regarding whether it's pricing or their pre-purchase work, quite apart from the simple dry detail, what's their process for identifying software? If they have inadequate processes, you can revisit your negotiations and you can reset your terms. So OpenChain is used for very dry, literal checking how do they manage their software. And it's also used for strategic discussion. In general, what is the health of this company's IP? And to what extent does the health of that IP feed into our final purchase? So that's an interesting area. And quite frankly, in OpenChain, currently, we don't have a lot of experience in our project for that, though quite a few companies are using OpenChain like that in the market. Now, if you want to be part of this, you don't have to do anything special. You simply go to our mailing list and you start talking. Or if you have a coherent, complete suggestion, you can go direct to GitHub, click New Issue, and just add it. And that's totally fine. And there's no such thing as a stupid idea here. If you're using OpenChain in security or in merger and acquisitions or in export control, anything you've learned or any ideas you have are super valuable, and we want to capture them all. One thing I would say, our project is democratic. Our project wants to make sure that we listen to the world. And for that reason, no one should ever assume that they need to be more expert, more professional, more renowned in any area. Everyone should always assume that whatever they have to share could be valuable to us. And that has been the key to our success. So when it comes to the issues on GitHub, if people make an issue that is not suitable, we will just explain why and close it. That's it. And if people have an issue that raises something interesting, we will make sure that we discuss it and learn from it. And that's basically the big picture of what we are up to. So we have contributing to the standard, mailing list, or GitHub. And we have a discussion about to start about optional extensions to the standard. And these are bridging the fact that our license compliance standard is used in security and export control. Bridging the fact that people are using us in merger and acquisitions. So we'll provide reference documentation, maybe checklists, maybe additional notes on processes. to make this more coherent around the world, so each company is not maintaining its own unique approach. Well, unless they want to. If they want to, that's fine. But we do want to standardize everything where possible. And there, I will just pause for any questions or comments. Okay, if we have no questions or comments, we're going to end this webinar shortly. The last note I'd make is about the extensions. I mentioned security, export control, and merger and acquisitions. That's because these are 3 use cases where we know people are using OpenChain. So we're going to begin working on those to standardize that approach. But there are probably many use cases we don't know about. So if you know about a different use case, or you can just think of a different use case, please raise it on our bi-weekly calls for the work teams, on our specification mailing list, or on GitHub. Because we do want to make sure that our extensions discussion covers as many extensions as possible to make sure that we help the market as much as possible. All right, if there's no other business, we will wrap it up there. I will just pause in case there is any other business. Okay, no other business. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. I know that some of you have gone through this material before, so I appreciate your time. And this meeting, of course, is designed to help start our webinars this year and to help our new audience from ISO to feel comfortable with what we're doing and to understand it clearly. Please have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you all soon.